8 layers of wool and fire inside Mongolia's mysterious, unfreezing home. Imagine standing on a vast white plain where the air itself feels sharp enough to cut. At minus 40 degrees Celsius, even your breath freezes on your eyelashes. The wind doesn't blow here. It roars across the steppe at 20 meters per second, unchallenged by trees, hills, or anything at all. It is just you, the snow, and the merciless cold of the eternal blue sky. In a place like this, survival in a home made of sticks and wool should be impossible. Yet for 3,000 years, an entire civilization has not only survived, but flourished. They rode across continents, built an empire from the Pacific to the Danube, and did it all while living in a shelter that can be packed onto a camel in under 2 hours. Welcome back to Historia Prime. Today we're not exploring castles or skyscrapers. We're stepping inside one of humanity's most brilliant, overlooked inventions. It appears to be a simple white tent, but it is anything but simple. It is a masterpiece of aerodynamics, thermodynamics, and sustainable living. This is the Mongolian ger, known to outsiders as the yurt. How does a ring of wood and a few layers of wool endure winters that can shatter concrete? Why were 13th century designs sometimes more efficient than today's modern homes? And what happens when ancient engineering collides with the challenges of the 21st century? From the brutal rhythmic ritual of beating wool into felt to the modern fight against toxic winter air in Ulaanbaatar, this is the story of a home shaped by wind, fire, and survival. A home that breathes with the land and refuses to freeze. This is 8 layers of wool and fire. And now, as tradition demands, let us open the door, facing south, and step inside. Part 1. The Aerodynamic Fortress. To understand the Mongolian ger, we must first look at what it truly is. Many people know it as a yurt, a word borrowed through Turkic and Russian languages. But to Mongolians, it is simply the ger, home. And calling it a home almost understates its genius, because what stands on the steppe is nothing less than a portable fortress shaped by wind, time, and necessity. At first glance, you see a perfect circle. Yet to an engineer, that circle is a weapon against the most relentless force on the steppe: the wind. A square house takes the full punch of a storm, catching air like a sail and creating pressure zones that tear at its frame. But the ger lets the wind slip around it. Its curved skin lowers drag, disperses force, and allows the structure to flex without breaking. In a storm, it doesn't resist the wind stubbornly. It breathes with it. And here's where the brilliance deepens. The entire structure is built without a single nail. The frame begins with the kana, a folding wooden lattice held together with sinew or leather, expanding like an accordion around the circle. Into this, the uni, long roof poles, reach upward toward the spiritual and structural heart of the home, the tuno, the crown ring at the top. Gravity pushes the roof downward, trying to force the walls outward. In a Western building, you'd need foundations and buttresses. But the nomad has neither. So instead, they use one rope. A tension band made from horse or yak hair wraps tightly around the entire structure, counteracting the outward thrust of the roof. Everything stays up because every part supports the others. If the band snaps, the ger collapses. But when it holds, the structure becomes astonishingly strong, able to bear snow, wind, and the weight of centuries of storms. This design has remained almost unchanged for over 1,000 years. Studies show that 13th century Mongolian gers were more thermally efficient than many modern versions, thanks to squat shapes and smaller roof openings that reduced heat loss. Ancient builders understood surface area to volume ratios long before the term existed. Yet a perfect frame is only the beginning. Strength alone cannot save you when winter falls to -40. And that is where the true secret of the steppe, the felt, begins to reveal itself. Part 2. The muscle of the gur. Felt. If the wooden frame is the skeleton of the gur, then the felt, ezgi, is its living, breathing muscle. Without it, survival on the Mongolian steppe would be impossible. Canvas would freeze, plastic would crack. Only wool, shaped by human hands and hardened by ritual, can stand between a family and a winter that can kill in minutes. The process begins each summer, when sheep are sheared by the hundreds. Their fleece is gathered, beaten rhythmically with long wooden sticks until it fluffs into a soft, cloud-like mass. The sound echoes across the grasslands like a heartbeat shared by the entire community. The wool is then spread over a mother felt, sprinkled with water, rolled tightly around a pole, wrapped in fresh hides, and dragged behind a galloping horse. For kilometers, the roll thunders across the earth. The vibration, pressure, and friction force the wool fibers to tangle and fuse into a single, dense sheet. As the horses run, the people chant blessings. May the felt be whiter than snow and harder than bone. This is not manufacturing. This is ceremony. It is engineering born from tradition, repeated generation after generation with almost no change. And the result borders on magical. Felt is hygroscopic, which means it manages moisture rather than trapping it. Inside a jur, where breathing, cooking, and living all happen in one compact space, humidity rises quickly. Modern insulation would soak, sag, and grow mold, but wool absorbs up to 35% of its weight in moisture without ever feeling wet. Even more astonishing, when wool absorbs moisture, it releases heat through a gentle exothermic reaction. As night falls, the walls of the gur quietly give warmth back to the people inside. Felt breathes. It filters toxins like formaldehyde. It resists fire. It shapes itself to the seasons. In winter, families add layer upon layer, 3, 4, sometimes more, until the gur becomes wrapped in a thick organic armor. These are the 8 layers of wool and fire, the protective skin that keeps the interior livable even as the outside world turns to ice. But this remarkable system hides a flaw rooted not in the felt itself, but in the physics of the home and in the changing world beyond the steppe. It is here that ancient wisdom collides with a dangerous modern reality. Part 3. The thermal paradox and the coal trap. The Mongolian gur may be a marvel of mobility, but hidden within its elegance lies a quiet and unforgiving weakness. It has almost no thermal inertia. Because it is built from light materials, wood and wool, the structure cannot hold heat the way stone or concrete can. When the central stove burns bright, the interior can feel almost spring-like, 25 degrees warmer than the frozen world outside. But the moment the fire fades, the warmth collapses. The temperature inside plunges rapidly, almost mirroring the night beyond the canvas walls. And so survival demands constant fire. Not sometimes, not only at night, constantly. For centuries, the fuel of choice was wood or dried animal dung, argal, collected from the steppe. But as the 20th century bled into the 21st, everything changed. Droughts, harsher winters, and economic pressures forced hundreds of thousands of nomadic families to abandon the open land and migrate toward Ulaanbaatar. They carried their gers with them and rebuilt entire communities on the city's outskirts, vast, unplanned ger districts stretching across the hills. But in the city, the steppe's natural fuels are scarce, and so families burn the only affordable option left: raw coal, cheap, dirty, and devastating. In winter, this choice transforms Ulaanbaatar into one of the most polluted cities on Earth. The air fills with microscopic PM2.5 particles, so concentrated they can reach more than 100 times the World Health Organization's safe limit. Yet inside the Gare, the air can be even more toxic. With poor ventilation and stoves burning day and night, pollution levels inside can be 4 times higher than the choking smog outside. The home that once carried an empire across continents has become a trap. The design that protected generations from brutal winters is now poisoning their children. And the cold makes everything worse. Most gers sit directly on frozen ground. Even with a wooden floor, the temperature underfoot can remain close to zero. Heat drains downward. Families compensate the only way they can. They burn more coal. The more coal they burn, the thicker the smog becomes. The thicker the smog becomes, the more the city freezes under its own pollution blanket. And so the cycle spirals on, a blend of poverty, physics, and geography. This is the moment where ancient design meets modern crisis, and it is here, on the edge of this paradox, that scientists and engineers step in, determined to save a home without erasing the culture it holds. Part 4. The Science of Retrofitting. How do you modernize a 3,000-year-old home without breaking the spirit that has held it together for millennia? That was the question facing teams of engineers from Brigham Young University, Mongolian researchers, and global partners like the World Bank. They understood immediately that they couldn't simply ask nomadic families to abandon their gers and move into concrete apartments. A ger is not just shelter, it is memory, identity, ancestry, and affordability woven into one living space. Changing it carelessly would be like rewriting a people's story. So they did what good engineers always do. They studied the problem with humility. Thermal cameras revealed the truth. Heat was escaping in 2 directions. First, radiating out through the felt-covered walls. Second, sinking downward into the frozen ground beneath the floor. The fix didn't require reinventing the ger. It required honoring its strengths and supporting its weaknesses. Their answer was remarkably simple. Rather than removing the felt, they added something new, a radiant barrier. A thin reflective sheet, almost like high-tech metallic bubble wrap, was layered between the traditional felt with a small gap of air. Felt stops conductive heat loss, but it does nothing against radiant heat. In a ger, most heat is radiant. By reflecting 95% of that energy back inside, the barrier transformed the thermal performance without altering the home's character. Then they tackled the floor. Instead of letting heat drain into the earth, they introduced a modular insulated platform made of wood and foam. It assembled like a puzzle, raising families off the freezing ground and trapping warmth where it belonged. The results were astonishing. Retrofitted gers needed far less fuel. Many could now be heated with a small electric heater instead of a coal stove. Indoor air pollution dropped nearly 50%. For the first time in generations, families could sleep through the night without feeding the fire at dawn. And while the world outside sat at minus 40 degrees, people inside walked comfortably in t-shirts. Ancient ingenuity had finally met modern thermodynamics, and the two fit together effortlessly. Yet even with this success, one truth remained. A ger is more than physics. It is a sacred geometry of life, and every change must respect the stories carved into its structure. Part 5. The Sacred Geometry of the Home. To understand why the ger has endured for thousands of years, we have to step beyond thermodynamics. We have to step into its spirit. Because a ger is not merely a shelter. It is a living diagram of how Mongolians see the world. It is a map of the universe, a compass guiding daily life, and a clock that tracks the sun across the sky. Everything begins with its orientation. A ger must face south, always. This simple rule shields the family from the icy northern winds and opens the home to the warmth of the rising sun. And as you enter, you do something instinctively meaningful. You step in with your right foot, careful never to touch the threshold. That narrow strip of wood is considered the neck of the home's spirit. Crossing it carelessly is like disrespecting the soul of the family. Once inside, you find a world divided with purpose. To the left, the western side, is the male domain. Saddles, bridles, tools, and the airag, the fermented mare's milk that fuels celebrations. To the right, the eastern side, lies the female realm. The stove, the utensils, the children's clothes, the heartbeat of family life. These roles are not rigid walls, but a choreography that has kept nomadic households organized for centuries. Then, directly opposite the door, facing the north, is the koimur. This is the sacred seat of honor. Here sits the altar, framed with photographs of ancestors, Buddhist icons, and tokens of lineage. Guests who enter the home, whether friends or strangers, are guided instinctively toward this place of respect. But the deeper magic of the ger rises above you. The two central pillars, the bagana,
stand like guardians of the sky. You never pass between them, and you never lean against them, because they represent the connection between earth below and the eternal heavens above. They are the spine of the world within. And then there is the tuno, the round opening at the top. It is far more than a window for smoke to escape. It is a sundial. As the sun travels across the sky, a beam of light moves slowly around the interior, marking time across the day. In this way, the ger becomes alive, participating in the rhythm of the world outside. The tuno is the eye of the home, watching the heavens and inviting their blessing in return. This is why, even as modern apartments climb into the skyline of Ulaanbaatar, many Mongolians refuse to let go of the ger. It is not just warmer or simpler or more affordable. It is a way of living that ties them to their ancestors, their land, and each other. A concrete box can provide walls, but only a ger provides meaning. Part 6. Powering the Nomad. The Solar Revolution. Tradition in Mongolia is deep and enduring, but it has never meant resisting change. And if you travel across the steppe today, you will notice a quiet revolution happening beside every white felt wall. Next to the ancient ger, standing against the endless horizon, there is almost always a small solar panel, gleaming in the sunlight like a signal of the future. This transformation began in the early 2000s with a bold initiative called the 100,000 Solar Ger Program. The Mongolian government, supported by the World Bank, knew the truth. You cannot run electric lines across the vast emptiness of the Gobi Desert and the steppe. The distances are too great, the terrain too harsh, and the population too mobile. So instead of bringing power to the nomads, they brought power systems for the nomads. Portable solar home kits spread across the countryside like seeds of a new era. Suddenly, families had enough electricity not only for light, but for satellite televisions, allowing herders to check weather forecasts, watch market prices for wool, and stay connected to a world far beyond the horizon. And this created a remarkable blend of old and new. During the day, a herder might still ride across the grasslands on horseback, guiding sheep with the same techniques used in the age of Genghis Khan. But at night, he would sit inside a ger warmed by an electric heater, illuminated by LED lamps powered by the sun, and watch the evening news. The past and the future no longer lived in conflict. They lived side by side, inside the same round walls. This is what resilience looks like. Not rejecting the future, and not abandoning the past,
but weaving the two together into something stronger. Yet even this revolution carries challenges. As families adopt more appliances, refrigerators, televisions, washing machines, the demand for electricity grows. Many solar panels struggle to keep up, especially during long winter months when daylight is short. And in the city, even with retrofitted GERs, the cost of running clean electric heaters is still higher than burning raw coal. The battle for a clean, warm GER is moving forward, but it is not won. Not yet. Because the true challenge now is scale. How to bring modern energy to a nomadic home without losing the heritage, the freedom, and the identity that the GER represents. Part 7. Lessons from the Roundhouse. So, what does the Mongolian GER truly teach us? What wisdom does a portable home, perfected on the open steppe, offer to a world drowning in concrete, complexity, and excess? First, it teaches us the quiet strength of flexibility. In a culture obsessed with building taller, heavier, and more rigid structures, the GER reminds us that survival often comes from yielding, not resisting. The strongest home is not the one that stands immovable against the wind, but the one that lets the wind slip past, the one that bends without breaking. Second, it teaches us the beauty of material intelligence. While we pour billions into advanced insulators and synthetic composites, the GER relies on wool, shorn from sheep, fluffed by hand, hardened by ritual, and shaped by horses running across the grass. And yet, that humble wool remains one of the most sophisticated regulators of heat and moisture ever discovered. Sometimes, the most advanced solutions are the ones nature already perfected. Third, it teaches us that a home is never just walls and a roof. It is a system, thermal, social, and spiritual. Its orientation, its symbolism, its geometry, and its rituals create a living space where engineering and meaning are inseparable. The GER functions because every part, from the Bagana pillars to the Tuno ring, carries not only structural weight, but cultural memory. And this lesson is timeless. Because from the 13th century warriors who carried these homes across continents, to the engineers retrofitting GERs in Ulaanbaatar today, the design has never stopped evolving. New layers of wool now sit beside radiant barriers. Old hearths share space with electric heaters. Solar panels stand outside, gathering light for families who still measure the day by the sunbeam moving inside the Tuno. The roundhouse is not locked in the past. It adapts. As the camera pulls back, imagine the GER shrinking to a single white dot in an ocean of grass. The sky turns purple and orange, the sun sinking below the horizon. And somewhere inside that tiny circle, a family warms themselves not just with fire, but with 3,000 years of inherited understanding. The next time you adjust your thermostat or think about insulation in your own home, picture the herder on the steppe. Picture 8 layers of wool and fire holding back the cold of a world that seems intent on freezing him out. And consider the possibility that the future of housing may not lie in conquering nature with thicker walls, but in moving with it, light as a feather, round as the sun. Thank you for joining me on this journey into Mongolia's mysterious, unfreezing home.